Good day, colleagues. My name is Isabelle McGinn, and I'm going to present to you on identifying potential risks to collection. And I will do this in light of the academic programs that I teach at the University of Pretoria. What are the core concepts that I teach the students? I'll look at potential risks to collections, what are the frameworks for managing these risks, and how we go about risk identification, doing a walkthrough, and eventually leading into preventive conservation actions. The University of Pretoria has 3 different programs. The first, an online certificate course aimed at in-service personnel who don't have any formal or academic training in museology but would like to know a little bit more. The second, an honours in heritage, museum and preservation studies, which is a general museology program with an emphasis on theory and practice, as well as a strong preventive conservation focus. While the Masters, started in 2019, is really for tangible heritage conservation. It looks at preventive conservation, it looks at understanding materials better through understanding chemistry and materials science, and it focuses on stabilization and remedial treatment of a variety of materials. Core concepts that I teach on these programs to varying depth depending on the program is the idea that at the core of any collecting institution in the GLAM sector, whether galleries, libraries, archives or museums, lie its collections. And that they really are the core of the business of these institutions, which are viewed as permanent. However, from the moment an object is created, it begins to change as a result of its interaction with the environment, its aging, etc. And so there's an inherent contradiction between what we expect of a museum to hold its collections permanently and the finite life of collections themselves. And it's important, or I view it as important, to teach the students that change is inevitable. It's a natural process. It can, however, be sudden, a particular event like a fire, or it can be slow and gradual loss over time as objects deteriorate. Loss can be partial or complete, but very often damage and deterioration is cumulative in nature. It adds up. Change is both dependent on the nature of the materials in the collections, so whether these are made of organic materials, inorganic, or a bit of both in composite objects, as well as a variety of environmental factors which can act on materials physically or chemically and cause their deterioration. There are so-called 10 agents of deterioration, or what I prefer to call them agents of change. These agents pose significant risks to collections and can include physical damage caused by physical forces, thieves and vandals, loss through fire or the action of water. There can be biological degradation through the action of pests such as insect and vermin, as well as chemical deterioration through contaminants and pollutants, through the action of light, through incorrect temperature and incorrect relativity, and, or more importantly, fluctuations of incorrect temperature and humidity. In addition, the last one, dissociation, ties into the relevance and importance of having sound documentation and record-keeping practices in place to prevent the loss of information associated with objects or the loss of or misplacement of objects. And so I teach the students that our main sphere of control is really in managing these various agents of change within the environment through preventive conservation measures, and that preventive conservation is a continuous process of repeated actions aimed at preventing damage, minimizing the deterioration of objects, and if we are able to identify these risks that are present in the environment, we can then mitigate their effect. Preventive conservation is not a once-off activity, as I said. It's a continuous process of risk assessment and risk management, which is carried out by monitoring and evaluating how collections are handled, packaged, transported, stored, displayed, and maintained. This is not done in isolation and is not the responsibility of a single portfolio within an institution. There are several pivotal documents that assist a collecting institution, such as a museum, in controlling the care of its collections. And that includes a collections care policy, a preventive conservation plan, a housekeeping manual and cleaning schedules, including integrated pest management, a building's maintenance plan and inspection schedules, such as fire and occupational health and safety, as well as a disaster and emergency preparedness plan. These documents work together like cogs, and one cannot work optimally without the other. But if you have all these plans and policies in place, they can help with identifying potential risks, setting up action lists and resulting budgets to phase in these actions, and preparing for ensuring that you are prepared for emergency planning, that you have a plan for business continuity, and that your recovery from a disaster or an emergency will be smooth and effective. So to identify potential risks, the Canadian Conservation Institute has come up with a preventive conservation framework, and these act on identifying risks on different levels of control, namely the building, the enclosure, and the object. Similar to an onion, imagine these different layers with the object in the middle, and each layer providing an additional barrier to the agents of deterioration. And in addition, each level has 5 applicable methods, namely to avoid, to block, detect and monitor, to respond, and then finally treatment and recovery. If preventive conservation is done well, it is like the base of a triangle, very broad, and acts on a large portion of the collections, whereas treatment and recovery in terms of conservation or restoration really acts on single objects at a time. And so resources, particularly if they are constricted, is much better applied to a larger portion of the collection by ensuring the environment is sound, rather than treating individual objects, which is very costly and time consuming. Not all agents can be avoided. You can't change where your building is located, for example, but there are means and ways of blocking the different agents and ensuring that that layer is not breached or is minimized. The effects are minimized as you go deeper into your protective layers that surround the object. Putting these strategies in place is completely ineffectual if one doesn't detect and monitor, make sure that temperature and humidity fluctuations are within a particular range. Data loggers are great, but if one doesn't look at the data and interpret it and make sure that what is happening is appropriate for your institution, then all those time and resources are for naught. So it's important to monitor that the strategies put in place are effective and to respond accordingly before you end up with treatment and recovery. In order to teach the students, I use a walkthrough checklist. So each agent is listed with potential items to look out for that link up to that particular agent. So in this case, water in terms of leaks and floods, not humidity. They start from the outside, looking inwards. So first they will check that the roof, the walls and windows do not leak. This is not necessarily something that they can do in depth as students, but in terms of professional life, they will then know that these are things that they need to have checked as part of building maintenance. Cleaning and checking the gutters regularly, particularly if there's tall trees around a building. Cleaning and checking drains regularly, looking for any signs of damp, whether it is rising damp or lateral damp from plants around the building. Doing this walkthrough highlights certain things to look out for, but also potential remedial treatment. So if there's a lot of plants or trees around a building that are regularly shedding leaves into the gutters, or that are blocking air circulation around the building, leading to damp, it is one of the solutions they can offer is then to cut back the tree or the plants in order to remedy that particular problem. So from this preventive checklist comes the actions of preventive conservation. Once the risks have been identified, strategies can be put in place to reduce or remove these risks to the collections, and these, I teach the students, can be phased in. Not everything needs to be done at once, and they really need to think of what priority items they are going to tackle first, as these can have budgetary implications. Removing boxes off the floor, which does a lot to prevent objects from getting wet if there's a flood, does not cost anything except a little bit of time and effort. But if one needs to move an entire storage area into a different building, this has massive budget implications. And so once they've identified the risks, they need to give an idea of these priorities, what can be done immediately with very little to no financial implications, and one needs to be budgeted in the medium term or even the long term. And it's very important for them as students to understand that they don't have to tackle everything at once. They're not there to save the world, but that each little change that they do cumulatively makes a big difference to their collections. And at the end of the day, we're aiming for best practice, but it is a process to get there. So in conclusion, things that I like or hope that the students get out of these lectures are that items and collections can change over time, collections can be damaged, items and collections have a finite usable life, but most damage is preventable, and one can slow down the processes of deterioration through preventive conservation. The best defense is a good offense, and it all starts with identifying risks. By using this risk assessment and management framework, regular monitoring and adapting systems to improve the general state of the collections, you will inevitably promote longevity. For that, I'd like to thank you.